what have you been able to do up to this point to prepare for if and when the DNR would assume management of Belle Isle?
Well, when we were given the assignment to take a look at the possibility of the state partner helping the city out by managing Belle Isle as a state park, what we did is we went out and did a lot of learning. We went out and assessed the situation at the park, current conditions. We sent staff out to observe what people were doing. Some of us, I've personally done events, ridden my bike and done things. And Bruce Ross, who's our field operations coordinator, grew up in Detroit and was there as a kid, and he's been out there many times. So we all pitched in. We had some specific experts that looked at things such as the buildings and structures, roads, and other things, and just talked to a lot of people just to learn. We were able to get copies of the master plan that exists. We've talked frequently with the staff on the island to learn, and basically it's just trying to gather background information to help us guide. We also sat down and got some input from and thoughts from the Belle Isle Conservancy and other people just to do this kind of backdrop assessment.
I just want to add too, I used to work at Belle Isle. That's where my first job when I started working for Parks and Recreation. I used to mow grass and stuff out there, and I go out there just about every weekend prior to anything coming down with Belle Isle, just to show my kids where I used to go when I was a kid. And Belle Isle is definitely a jewel. It really is.
Go ahead.
In your initial assessments that you've been able to conduct so far, what do you see as the current conditions, and what might need to be looked at right away?
Well, I think based on, there's a number of things that, like any park, there's always things that need attention, things such as that are difficult. One is, of course, buildings that are expensive, and there's some leaky roofs and some problems. There's obviously some restroom facilities on the island, for whatever reason, are not able to be open, and we're trying to figure out perhaps ways that they could be restored. Currently, many of them have portable restrooms out on the front. There are things in the canals and different things like that trying to figure out how we could clean up and assess some of those. And just general spiff up and spruce up of things. There's some dead trees and things like that need to be addressed, some drainage issues, and like I said, a number of things that are typical in a park area where there's been difficulty finding funds to do some of those sorts of things. And a lot of those, such as the bathrooms, are direct service to customers, and certainly picnic shelters and places like that where people come and trying to make sure that they're as fixed up and spiffed up as they possibly can for people that actually rent facilities and things. But again, the presentation of things, the basics, making sure the litter gets picked up regularly and things like that. And so it's a lot of basic things, security lights and things like that need to be addressed. There's some graffiti and all. So it's just a whole gambit of things. Again, I want to say that these are typical to a park areas, and it's not like staff go out and do these sorts of things. It's users that come and unfortunately abuse facilities such as graffiti or litter or glass breaking and things like that. And those are things that we would hope to get picked up, but also hope to try to work on some educational campaigns and things like that. Those are some of the kinds of things that we've looked at. But again, those buildings and larger infrastructure and road fixing and things like that are a lot more involved and things like that. Obviously, the last piece is there's a number of infrastructure for things such as the old golf course and things like that are now not open, and trying to figure out if there is a pathway to see if something like that could be put back in order or operation that could pay for itself or something, or if to figure out a way that maybe these areas could be repurposed somehow. But again, looking at the master plans and listening and talking to people, those will go a long way to helping guide that if in fact we were to get more involved in this. But it all depends on the relationship between the state and the city, and but things I mentioned are things we've observed.
Yeah, I just want to say when I was a youngster, where I used to go and learn about natural resources was Belle Isle. Belle Isle was my learning institute, and I've always had a pipe dream that we could develop a learning institute at Belle Isle for young people. And we've had some conversations with some various groups to maybe implement something like that. And like I said, Belle Isle, that was my learning institute. I learned everything there was and is about natural resources, and that's the reason why I'm in Parks and Recreation right now. And I think just the island itself, being that learning and wellness institute, could go a long way for a lot of things with kids.
What do you have any kind of a vision of what this institute could where it would be located on the island, and what kind of services and programs, overnight camping, things along those lines?
Well, I look at instead of building a facility, what have you. I mean, Belle Isle itself, institute. I mean, you have the wooded areas, you have the Detroit River, you have the canals there. There is so much, and just going back to the future, I used to collect leaves. I used to collect tadpoles and insects, samples of birds and what have you. I used to bring that stuff in my house. I actually brought a garter snake in the house one time. My mother liked to have a fit. But getting back to what you just stated earlier, I just think the island itself is the facility, and I envision not only high school age students, but elementary school students and middle school students as well, using that as an institute. And I think one thing too is piggybacking with the local schools in Detroit and schools throughout the Detroit area, and letting them know that Belle Isle is just a haven of knowledge in terms of natural resources.
Thank you. Tell me again about this New York City trip that you went to just recently.
Well, actually, I did not go, but we partnered with the Michigan Recreational Park Association, who had a representative go to the conference, and it was about urban parks, and the Urban Land Institute and others were there, and the executive director of MRP brought back a lot of great information about unique partnerships and things that are going on in New York City as well as other urban communities. We've also looked at some things in Pittsburgh, where there's a Point Park down in Pittsburgh that's a state park. Also, we've had conversations with the state of Massachusetts that has presence in downtown Boston, and some other places such as Cincinnati and others that we'll be looking at and have looked at. For example, there are public-private partnerships that exist in Cincinnati, where that on the riverfront you have a Montgomery Ribs that sits right on the waterfront, and then you have a very sophisticated rowing club there and some other things. So there's a lot of benchmarking and proven partnerships that people have done. Now, whether those sorts of things belong appropriately on Belle Isle is another issue, but opening up ideas and saying, well, this worked there and that worked, and also exploring partnering with big special events and different things. We know the Grand Prix is out there and things like that, and there's a number of people in the city that are heavily involved in events like that, and we would want to look, not to say it hasn't been already, but to look to see what evolution there might be in that regard. So, but there's a lot of groups and foundations and different things that might weave their way into this. But again, they're just ideas, and they're options, and they're considerations. Part of this, again, is our learning process to see what might be possible. And this also, I might add, may find its way to the park, Milliken State Park, that we already operate in downtown Detroit as well as the Globe building, which we're planning to develop. So all these things in this in the area could be utilized regardless.
One of the, I'm sure, key partnerships you're looking to cultivate and continue is with the Belle Isle Conservancy, the volunteer group.
Yeah, we've met at least twice with them and exchanged information, and groups like the Conservancy that also engulfs the previously Friends group that was there provides a very valuable asset, and this is one of the partners that would be key to this whole process. And they've done a lot of great work already on the island over the many years there's been involvement. So we want to build on that, and in talking with them, there's a tremendous amount of expertise that has been developed about various topics, whether it's historic preservation, environmental protection, and so forth, and certainly historic restoration. So we plan to be very closely aligned with them and their ideas and concepts and the partnerships that they could bring as a conservancy that we as government would have a hard time engaging with.
Bruce, you mentioned earlier that you grew up in Detroit. Where at?
I grew up 7 Mile in Woodward, right by the State Fairgrounds.
And then you also mentioned that Belle Isle has a special place in your heart. Can you tell me why?
Yeah, Belle Isle, you know, my relatives, when I was young, my grandparents, my mother, and my aunties and uncles, or some of them are long since passed, used to take me to Belle Isle. And we used to spend the whole day at Belle Isle. And we didn't have air conditioning. We used to hang out at the beach. We used to hang out at Scouts Fountain. Had an opportunity to see Scouts Fountain at night when the lights used to illuminate. But when I go out to Belle Isle, even to this day, it's like my relatives, they all come alive again. And I remember when I was a kid, like I had mentioned earlier, Belle Isle was my learning institute. I used to go there and spend the whole day there. And I remember there was one time in the summer that I went out to Belle Isle to collect my leaves and look at the tadpoles and look at the insects out there. And I lost track of time, and my mom came out to retrieve me. And I remember I was coming across the bridge, and here's my mother in this old 1970 Valiant. She comes driving right by. She says, "You know, it's time to go home." And she didn't yell at me, though, because she knew that's where I was at and I was having fun. Belle Isle is personal to me. I look forward to having the opportunity to help in any way that I can enhance this wonderful jewel.
Tell me again about a class at Wayne State that took you out onto Belle Isle.
Yes, I had an outdoor education class that was taught by Dr. Diane Pick. She was with the Parks and Recreation Department at Wayne State University. And I thought I knew it all about Belle Isle, and she was filling in a lot of blanks for me at Belle Isle, about Frederick Law Olmsted and all these individuals at Belle Isle. She even filled in the blanks about Scott's Fountain. I remember when I was a kid, and I thought Scott, I think his name was James Scott, they named Scott's Fountain after, I thought he was a politician, or I thought he was a Detroit mayor, and then I found out that he was a real estate developer and wasn't looked upon favorably, in Detroit at the time. I guess he donated a ton of money to do something at Belle Isle. I think he donated his entire fortune. And it took a while for the city council to figure out what they were going to do. And it turned out they decided to go ahead and build this fountain. And I heard they had over $250,000 to build that fountain. But Dr. Pick was filling those blanks for me. And I wish there was somehow some way that I could reconnect with Dr. Pick, because she was really into Belle Isle and she was really into outdoor education.